Welcome to the Author Spotlight podcast by Morpheus Publishing, an exciting new podcast hosted by Justine Martin, CEO and founder of Morpheus Publishing, a division of Justine Martin Corporation. Justine is an accomplished author, publisher, writing coach, and illustrator. She will guide you through the captivating journey of bringing your words to the world, crafting stories that matter, tales that inspire, and books that make a difference. In each episode, Justine and Morpheus Publishing will spotlight a new author who has published an amazing book in genres such as personal development, self-help, children's picture books, and memoirs. Through the help of Morpheus Publishing, these authors have turned their dreams into reality, and now, you get to hear their stories. Join us on this journey as we explore the world of writing, publishing, and the incredible stories that come to life through the Author Spotlight podcast.
Welcome back, listeners, to Morpheus Publishing Author Spotlight podcast. Today with me, I've got a very good friend who I call Harry, but I'm going to let her introduce herself to the wider audience. So go for it, Harry.
Well, hello, everybody. So, yes, Justine bottled out of saying my name, which is Angharad Candlin, which is Welsh and complicated and trips everybody up.
It sure does. Our last podcast for your previous book took me 7 takes to get it right. So today I'm like, no, not doing that. I'm taking taking the easy road out and getting you to introduce yourself. Though I have done a blurb prior to us talking, obviously, with a bit of your bio. But let's jump straight. That's really great English today to start off. Let's jump straight into all the questions that I've got for you today. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in community psychology?
Yeah. So I've worked as a community psychologist for over 30 years. And I worked with families predominantly. So I've worked alongside child protection, domestic violence, parenting, and, really working with probably, I would say, the most vulnerable members of our community. And I loved every minute of it. It was challenging and it was exhausting, but I really felt like I was making a difference. And then I was forced to medically retire due to the impact of multiple sclerosis and psoriatic arthritis. So that was 2 years ago. And since then, I have been writing books and training practitioners and speaking at events because I really didn't feel like I was ready to give up giving back to the community.
What inspired you to transition from practitioner to author? Well,
I think when I had to retire, I was really ready to finish giving back to the community. I've worked in sort of supervision and leadership roles, and one of the things that the feedback that I had always got was when I'm sort of training and I'm trying to explain things, I use storytelling, and I've been trained in storytelling as part of the way that I worked as a psychologist. And I think that there's quite a lot of things and social issues, I suppose, that are important to read about, to write about. So kind of transition into being an author was really just an extension of what I'd been doing, as a practitioner and as a supervisor. And so it just kind of was a natural flow for me to do that. So I started with my first book, Bugger Shit, My Quest for Resilience, that book with that name. And that was all about resilience. And I just thought that was a really important topic to talk about. So the things that I write about are the things that I know. They always tell you to write what you know, and social issues and tricky situations are what I know. So I just using stories to help educate the community.
Now, this is the third book that you've actually published through Morpheus. You were a co-author in Whispers of Resilience, Our Stories of Multiple Sclerosis. So thank you for entrusting us with your words. Why did you feel now was the right time to tell Emily's story?
Oh, that is a really good question. So Emily and I have been almost lifelong friends, and it is a very difficult story. And I had wanted to write this story because I think Emily's story is something that can help the community, help women in a similar situation, men in a similar situation to her, but also for the community to understand how domestic violence evolves, really. And we see often these little snapshots. There's a little comment in the media, or there's some sort of sanitized version of it. And I really wanted there to be a way to help the community understand the complexities and, you know, how things can evolve. So I had wanted to, but also Emily was not in a great space. She has not been in a great space for a long time. And then there was this really funny moment, and I had been in our emergency department, being bitten by a spider or something, and so I needed to go up there. And then she just randomly FaceTimed me, and she was in a good space and she was laughing at my predicament. And I just flagged it with her and I said, you know, I was wondering whether you might let me tell your story, because I think it's a story that's really important, and I think it's a story that the community needs to listen to and they need to hear it. And she said yes. So here we are, about a year ago, I think, that we had that conversation.
It was. And then you had to finish, obviously, Bugger Shit before.
I did. And I needed to visit Emily, to interview her in person, because there's a lot of story. I knew Emily's story. I knew the framework and the sort of skeleton of Emily's story, because I know her so well. But I was really aware this is difficult stuff that we're going to be talking about. So I needed to find a time where I could interview her, go to her and interview her, and that she had, you know, space and time to do it. And we could only do little bits at a time because it's such a raw subject.
It's confronting.
Very confronting.
You know, from someone who's been through domestic violence myself, I can only imagine, you know, Emily saying everything recalling everything that she went through, on how much toll, and reliving that again, that must have taken. And so very, very brave of her to do so with there. So let's talk about the anatomy of domestic violence is what we're talking about. Emily's story. It's such a raw and confronting read. I've read it half a dozen times. As the publisher, you do these things. But can you describe what this book is about in your own words?
Well, it's a very personal story, and I think actually the word that's just come to mind is that it's a love story of friendship, like the two of us. And I'm going to get emotional. And so it's a testament to our friendship. Really, that's what it is. And I wanted her to know that she wasn't alone, but it is about really the horrific abuse that Emily has experienced for about 30 years. So she was married for 26 years, but the abuse started before she was married, and it has continued since she's been divorced. There continues to be abuse, even though they're separated, they're divorced, they're living completely separate lives. And so she has always said that I am the only person who believed her, and which I think is just terrible.
That's so sad.
It's so sad. But that's something that I've heard so many victim survivors of domestic violence, that is, nobody believed me. And so really this is a story about horrific abuse, but it's real. And this is not the story that people hear, because, as I said earlier, it's just snippets. But it is...
Or it's sanitized, like the stuff that we hear in the media is sanitized.
And for Emily, and for all victim survivors, I think what they want is for people to understand it. Because also what happens is that predominantly women, some end up in situations where there is coercive control, there's gaslighting, there's physical violence, there's sexual violence, there's financial abuse, there's religious abuse. And it's so gradual and it's so manipulative, and that often women or men don't realise. I'm going to use the gendered term women because even though it does happen to men, and I have explored that in the book, I've been very clear in the book that it happens to men as well. What we know is that 78 women were murdered in Australia last year. And so, yes, absolutely abuse happens to men as well. But women, other people, is the gender that gets murdered. That's an atrocious statistic as a person, as a human, as a friend, as a psychologist. And so I think for Emily as well as me, it was really about trying to expose this story to explain how this can evolve and how this actually happens, so that victim survivors can actually look at it and read it and go, oh, you know what, that's actually what my partner's doing, or my former partner is doing. And oh, okay, because I don't know about you, but I speak to many women who don't realise necessarily abuse. They don't know.
And I didn't either. It wasn't until I was reading through, as you know, I'm writing my memoir at the moment, and it wasn't until I read through Emily's story and the whole book, and I went, oh, hang on here. Some of these previous relationships that I've had, there's a pattern here, and it really made me question, okay, that's abuse.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hadn't considered it, but, you know, abuse isn't just being hit.
No.
There's so much more in depth of it. And, I'd like to consider myself a highly intelligent woman, yet I fell victim to it. So it can happen to anyone.
Yeah, and Emily says, she said to me, lots of times, I can't believe that how was I so stupid? And I was like, you weren't stupid. And a lot of, I hear this a lot. I hear the general community saying, well, why did she fall in love with somebody who was so abusive? Why did she marry somebody who's so abusive? And the reason is because they weren't abusive at the beginning. They didn't. They fell in love with somebody who was, loved them and showered them with, compliments and gifts and, love and all of that, or love. And that's who they fell in love with. And then there's this change. And I think a lot of people... Sorry?
That change happens as soon as they know that they've hooked you and that you're there. And then all of a sudden, they change, but it's a gradual, they're eating away at you, they're eating away at you, you're testing your sanity on all of this, and like gaslighting, there's always gaslighting.
And undermining of the very self, and so I actually, right at the very beginning when they were dating, I had a bad feeling about him. Now, I was 22. We were both very young. I was a psychology student. I didn't know about domestic violence. This was in the 1980s. It wasn't being talked about. Certainly, there was no conversation like there is now. And so I didn't know what it was, but what happened at their wedding, I don't know whether you're going to ask me this question, but I'm going to leap in, and I confronted him and challenged him at their wedding in the only way that I could know as a 22-year-old. Now, if it was now, I would be much more overt and very clear. It wouldn't have even got to the point of a wedding. But I went up to him. He was on his own, and he was at the cake table, and I said, if you ever hurt her, you will have me to answer to. I'm not entirely sure I knew what I was going to do, but I just wanted him to know that I had clocked it and put him on notice that this is my closest friend and you better look after her. When I put that in the book, I was a bit concerned that people might think that me writing this book is about revenge and retribution. And I want to be really clear that it isn't, because he is completely unidentifiable. We have changed timeframes, locations, every single name has been changed. So it is impossible to identify which particular family this is relating to. If I had wanted revenge, I would have taken out an ad at the, in the Sydney Morning Herald or something. It's not about that. It is about...
This is about giving Emily her voice that she didn't have for 30 years. And protecting her as well.
Yeah, and I have a voice, and I've also trained. So I've been trained in a specific program called Safe and Together, which is a domestic violence or awareness, sort of program. And really for me, so I knew about domestic violence. I worked alongside domestic violence for a very long time. And then, but being trained in Safe and Together just gave me a language to use and a way to support victim survivors, but also challenge perpetrators of violence as well. And so I could then write this book from a perspective of being a very close friend, but also as a psychologist and also somebody who was trained in Safe and Together and has, sort of supervised other people trained in Safe and Together. So I felt like I could bring all of those things together to have a very accurate and very thoughtful book, because the book isn't just Emily's story. The book is really me unpacking how this happened and the society that we live in. And
that system.
The system, yeah. So I want people to know that, and I mean, you're probably better at answering this question than me, Justine, but when I put this together, I didn't want people to be overwhelmed by Emily's story. So what I've done is I've put in parts of Emily's story and then I've reflected on it in terms of the specifics around society and statistics and information. And then we move to the next chapter and there's a bit of Emily's story. So I hope you never get into the bit where you're feeling like you're in the depths of despair reading her story, but that you hear it and then you're able to reflect the process and the system that has allowed that to happen. I hope that was your experience reading it.
100%, from someone that has had a lot of domestic violence in her life. We weren't sure how I would go in reading it and helping edit it and put it all together. And it was confronting, but there was enough of it to give you an insight into her life and then enough of about the system and about how that happened. And I got angry about that, not just about the monster that did that to her, but also the system that continually let her down. All the way through. So you're already answering my questions here. A lot of the, Harry, no, that's okay.
Have you ever thought about writing your own book? Join the Morpheus Publishing Writing Group program and turn your dream into reality. Contact Morpheus Publishing today and start your journey to becoming a published author.
What do you hope readers will take away from reading Anatomy of Domestic Violence?
That is a very good question. What I am hoping is in chapter 15, one of the penultimate chapter, I reflect on perpetrators and on society and what we can do to turn this around. Because I could just write this book and there's a book. But actually what I want to do is make a difference. And I think writing this book and people understanding this decades-long experience that Emily has had, I hope that it will educate the community. I hope that victim survivors will feel supported and that somebody has heard them and I've listened to them. And that perpetrators will be given an opportunity to consider what they're doing. I think one of the things that happens with perpetrators is that they are often portrayed exactly as you said, Justine, which is as a monster. And I am completely agreeing with you. The things that Emily's husband did to her were unimaginable. Beyond human. However, I start that chapter with a quote that is pretty much my North Star, which is every person you will ever meet has infinite worth. Now, I have challenged in many situations of work where I've heard many, many stories of horrific things that have happened to people by other people. But this was personal. And this was the abuse that Emily experienced was, I mean, I say at some point in the book, quite honestly, my biggest surprise is that Emily's still alive. But at the same time, we can't just pass off perpetrators as monsters, because they were born, they're babies. And as a human being, every single human has infinite worth. People don't wake up one day and choose. I mean, domestic violence and violence is a choice. They don't just wake up and decide to be violent. There is always something that has gone before, and that is not to excuse it. We can't ever excuse it, but it is about understanding it. And if we're to turn this around, we have to work with perpetrators. And I think historically, there has been, absolutely correctly, the focus has been on victim survivors to the detriment of perpetrators. And if we don't work with perpetrators, this is just going to keep continuing, because they're going to go on to perpetrate violence with somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. So the only way we're going to turn this around is by connecting with perpetrators and holding them to account for their actions and getting them to think about their actions.
That's a tough one.
Very tough.
Because the majority of the time they don't think they've done anything wrong.
Well, yeah, that's right. So it's...
And then the next generations are watching and they're learning.
And that's the thing. So Emily they have children, and those children have grown up being, as part of that, they are equal victim survivors to Emily, because even though they weren't assaulted, seeing their parent assaulted is abuse. That is child abuse. It is very clear. And they were living with the impact of that. And so we have to really be aware of the children, and that when you grow up in that, then you can't be not affected by it.
Yeah.
One of the things that you asked me to put in the book, Justine, when we were talking about it, was the impact on children, but also on babies who are not yet born, who are still in the womb. And so this is where my psychologist frame comes in. So I can describe this as a friend and as just somebody writing it, but as a psychologist, I understand a lot of the brain science and the neurology and the biology of it. And so what we know is that infants still in the womb, when their mother experiences trauma, that impacts the hormones that are flooding us. And those hormones are then, because they're joined, they then impact the unborn baby. And so those babies are born already with a predisposition to be anxious and to be alert to violence and to other traumatic, sensitized. They're born sensitized, sensitive to traumatic events. And it's called epigenetics. So their genetic framework changes. And so it's not just about what children have seen and experienced, but what unborn babies have felt. And the genetics changes, and that goes on and on and on down through the generations. And so we really need to change that. And what I want this book to do is to educate everybody, but there are also some very specific groups of people that I want to educate and let them understand how their actions and words or inaction impact on people. And of course, that's the system, not the perpetrators. I mean, that's one thing, but the systemic failure to support Emily and her children is outrageous. And so I want this book to get into the hands of police, into the hands of counsellors, hospital staff, every single person who is around somebody who is a victim survivor or a perpetrator. They need to understand this. And one of the biggest systems is the family law system, because the family law system in whatever Western country we're talking about is set up, the way it's set up at the moment, makes victim survivors even more unsafe. And I want them to read this.
Yeah, totally understand that. And that's why I never laid charges when my arm was broken, because he knew how to get in the house. He knew the layout of the house, and how was a piece of paper going to stop him, and who was going to be here. I was already vulnerable. I was already scared. how was that ever going to work?
And a lot of people say there's this perennial question of, well, why didn't she leave? And I've really unpacked that in the book so people can understand the complexities of it. But what the basic thing that I think anybody who doesn't really understand domestic violence needs to understand, that the two most lethal times for a woman to leave, to experience lethality, is when she leaves or when she's pregnant. Those two times. So women don't leave because they fundamentally know that if they leave, they are more likely to get murdered. And when we have the systems around them that can't support them or don't support them, that is a very, very dangerous position for a woman to be in.
100%. It's, yeah. What was the most emotionally difficult part of writing this book?
Gosh, that's a good question. And I think probably, believe it or not, it's actually not Emily, the experience of abuse that Em had when I'm describing the abuse. It was actually the response of a counsellor. I cannot describe to you how enraged I was, because this counsellor that Emily went to see should have been the person that she could trust and who could support her and make her safe. Instead, and this is going to outrage the listeners, when I say the counsellor asked her, is there a history of domestic violence? And she responded, yes. And the counsellor's response was, well, how do you provoke him? And then later on, the counsellor's judgment of her was, I think you're fundamentally lazy. And hearing that and knowing the story, absolutely just... and as somebody who was a board authorised supervisor of psychologists and worked in the sector for decades, I actually, when Emily told me that, I had to stop myself and say, I'm sorry, what? Like, really? Like, did I just hear you right? Because that was outrageous. And so for me, that was probably the hardest bit. It was almost like, because I've worked along in this sector for so long and I've heard the stories. And so it's not that you get sort of removed from them, because every single story is makes my heart break. And it is what has motivated me to stay in the sector for so long. But when I hear professionals who should know better do really badly, then that enrages me, because that should have been the point where Emily was safe, but actually she was made more unsafe because she had zero trust in anybody.
So sad. So sad. And went on for so long.
Decades.
That's the thing as
decades. Yeah. And I asked Emily all along, because I understood it. And so I understood what was happening. I didn't know the depths of it until I interviewed her for the book. But she did what a lot of people do, and we call it mutualizing the violence, which is by saying, they're both as bad as each other, they're both violent, they're both argumentative, it's a marriage issue, they need to go to marriage counselling. Now that is unbelievably dangerous when we're talking about violence, domestic violence, whether it's physical violence or whether it's coercive controlling, or, sort of anything else that goes, financial abuse or whatever. And so when we mutualise it, what we do is we lose the victim survivor and we blame the victim survivor, when actually this is somebody who is perpetrating the most horrific abuse. And so what was happening with Emily, and I didn't understand it because I didn't, early in my career, I didn't understand all of those kind of references, that she was saying, oh, well, we've both behaved quite badly, when actually she hasn't. And for her, writing this book with me, or me interviewing her for this book, has been the most unbelievably healing experience for her, because she felt heard. And I would say to her frequently, that was not your fault. And because what she's heard from him, but also from society, when you have a counsellor saying, what did you do to provoke him, and you're lazy, is to blame yourself. And so when I was saying to her, this is not your fault.
And because she was with him from a very young age. And when you don't know any different, and because her parents also, you have to read the book to get the full story, but she didn't know any different.
It was her second
At all?
Her second relationship. She'd had a relationship with a guy when she was in high school, and then she met him in her last year of high school, like just as she was leaving high school before she went to uni.
And then he followed her.
And then he followed her.
There is a giveaway.
And he isolated her. And he made sure that she was isolated from me because I was the person who could see through him, and he knew that straight away.
And that's what they do. So how do you think this book contributes to the wider conversation around coercive control in Australia?
Well, so we've got new legislation is rolling in across all jurisdictions about coercive control. I think one of the things, there is this absolute lie that unless somebody has been violent, then it's not abuse. What I know, and what those of us who are sort of working in the sector, is that some of the most terrifying behaviour doesn't involve any kind of physical violence at all. It is coercive control. And the thing about coercive control is that it gets under the radar, because this is not somebody who's showing up at the emergency department with a broken bone. This is not somebody who's showing up at work with bruises. But so what happens is there are no, what I say, eyes on this family, and then the woman is murdered. That's the first anybody hears about it. And we have heard all of those stories that have come. I mean, the devastating murder of Hannah Clark and the children. You know, there have been so many stories when nobody knew anything. And people are interviewed and they're like, well, he was a really nice bloke. And you know what? Emily's husband was a really nice bloke to anybody else. And he's put together and he's sharp and he's intelligent. And he wears nice suits and he's got a good job. And nobody had eyes on them. And so it is incredibly dangerous. So and the other thing is that there has historically been what's called an incident-based approach, where there's an incident of violence. Well, what we know is that it's not just an incident of violence. It is a pattern of behaviour. And this is what the coercive control laws are about, is about recognising the pattern of behaviour. So, because often, I mean, it still happens with the police. They should know better. They've all been trained in coercive control since the legislation came in. But we're still hearing it with police saying, well, you know, they didn't physically assault you, so it's, you know, we can't do anything, which is not true. So this is a pattern of behaviour. This is a pattern of controlling behaviour. This is a pattern of financial abuse, spiritual abuse, isolation. And that's the most important thing, is that we understand that abuse does not happen in a vacuum. There is a lot of stuff that's wrapping around it if we just have eyes to see and if we ask the questions. And if somebody had asked the question, and I asked myself, if I'd have asked more specific questions, would this have been any different? And I don't know whether it would have been or not. It's almost like a pointless question because I don't know what the answer is be, and Emily doesn't know what the answer would be either. But what it's doing is alerting the community. And so what I hope happens through this book is that people will actually understand the anatomy of domestic violence, the skeleton, the muscles, the skin that is around domestic violence, that it is not an incident. This is a pattern of behaviour. And I want everybody to open their eyes to it, because we cannot continue. 78 women were murdered last year in Australia. We can't. So one of the statistics that is in the book, and because I really wanted to kind of measure this against other Western societies as well. So I've sort of reflected on the UK and the US and Canada and Europe. And so the UK, very similar to Australia. There's, you know, very similar social issues. So I wanted to know what was it like in the UK versus Australia. We had 78 women who were murdered last year. In the UK, 90 women were murdered last year. So I would say I did the calculations, but actually I'm rubbish at maths, so a friend did the calculations. And this is the thing that really struck me. When we look at male violence against males, about the same amount of men were murdered in Australia and the UK when we looked at it, you know, per capita. You know, we did the statistics. But in Australia, double the number of women were murdered than were murdered in the UK last year. This is horrific. 78 women were murdered last year. And it's looking like it might even be worse this year. And it's got worse and worse and worse. And the government has been committing money to it, like resources, but it isn't enough. It is a national emergency. And what I really hope Emily's story will do will get into the hands of the people who need to read it. So I guess my request is that people, if you read this, get it into the hands of your local MP. Get it into the hands of your local police. Get it into your hands of whoever it is who might have an influence on this. Because, as I've said in the book, no government has ever been able to stop violence. This is a whole of community approach. So we all have to think about, we can't afford to sit back and say, it doesn't happen to me. In fact, one of the things that I say in the book is one of the most unsafe places for women is actually in their spiritual communities. And a lot of people, when we're talking about that, they think, oh, the Muslim community. It's like, well, no. I mean, yes, it's in every single religious community. And some of the most dangerous places for women are in Christian churches. And years ago, a male friend of mine said, well, we were talking about domestic violence because I talk about it a lot. And he said, well, I'm glad none of the people that I know or in my circle are doing this. And I said, I can guarantee that they are. And he was genuinely shocked by that. And because it goes under the table. It's under the radar. It's under the table. So what I want is for people to open people's eyes. So Emily and her family, very middle class, educated, and nobody knew what was going on behind closed doors. So we all have to be responsible. So I really want people to read it. It's not a long book, and it is a very confronting book, but it's an easy book to read. But I want people to read it and to be challenged by it. And I want them to think about, what can I do in my circle of influence to make a difference? That's what I really want people to take away from this book, because it is a national emergency. And whilst I say no government has ever been able to stop domestic violence, I think unless we look at it as a national emergency with national emergency powers, it's not going to end. We have to do something very big. And so we have a lot of money that's spent on defence and on terrorism, but actually the biggest terrorist threat is to women in their homes. That's where terrorism is sitting, and we need to throw everything that we can at it. And yes, there are some people who can do big things, but mostly this is about people doing stuff in their circle of influence and checking.
And then building and rolling,
yeah,
and then...
That's right. That's right. I do just want to add one thing, Justine, which is to talk about my next book, because the book that I started on. I don't know whether you're going to ask me about that, but one of the things that I was challenged with from my own writing was that I've written this book about this person who perpetrated such horrific violence and the system's lack of functioning to do anything. We talk about male role models, and we're talking about men seeing other men do things differently. So what I decided to do was we needed to really look at what's happening with men, because we hear about boys who are, boys and men who are feeling disconnected, particularly. And so I wanted to put something back and think about my circle of influence. And I have quite a wide circle of influence. I've got a voice and I can write. And so I sat down one afternoon with my sister and I listed off all of the people who are very quiet role models. And I know. And so people from a paramedic, we've got somebody who went through a divorce, a really difficult family law matter, but rose above everything and was an incredible role model to his children. And, various other people. It's like we need to
bringing that out.
We need to
next year.
Yeah, that's coming out next year in time for Father's Day.
Yeah.
But we need to really look at positive role models.
Are you loving the podcast so far? Imagine the possibilities if you had Justine Martin guiding you through your writing journey. Whether you're crafting your next big book or perfecting a personal project, Justine's expertise can elevate your work. Don't miss out on the chance to work with a seasoned pro, ready to take your writing to the next level. Message us today and let's make your writing dreams come true.
So what was your writing process like for a book that's both deeply personal and professionally informed?
Yes. So it started about a year ago, as I said, with that conversation with Emily. And the very first thing that I did was interview Emily. It took a few months for us to sort it out. But I started with a couple of interviews with Emily. So I just got this, and we were trying to work out timeframes and timelines and all of that kind of stuff, because really wanted to make sure that we had the facts right. And so then what I started to do, so I wrote the story and it kind of evolved. And so we put it in sort of chronological order. And then as I sort of put it together, I thought, right, this is not just about Emily's story. We need to look at how that actually happened. So because I've worked in the sector for so long, there's a lot of stuff that I just knew. And I knew where to find data and things like that. So for me, probably writing Emily's story was one thing. It was almost like you're writing, there was a dual process going on. One was me being very impacted and writing Emily's story. And then there was the other part of me, which is with my psychologist hat on, looking at the evidence to support it. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't make any claims that weren't correct. So I was really double checking all of that. But then there was one point where it took a while, because I was writing and then stopping and then writing, because it was overwhelming for me. And at one point I messaged a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and I said, I think I need some clinical supervision around this. Because what I discovered was, when I was working, I was surrounded by an amazing team, and we supported each other, and we heard horrific stories every day, but we're together. We're a team. We're together. We could debrief. We could all of that stuff. I was writing this on my own. This was my process, and I had to. And
it was someone that you knew.
Yeah, someone that I knew, and I had to support her as well and make sure she was okay. And so I contacted. I said, I think I need some clinical supervision around this. So we met and had brunch and talked and talked and talked. And I knew that I could talk to her without her getting impacted by it, because I had worked with her. And I know that this is her bread and butter. And that she would listen to me and hold me and validate me, and that I could let it all out, and then I could go back to doing it. So I did all of that. I did all of the research sort of at the end, just to make sure that I had everything. And then what I did was Emily and I FaceTimed every night for a few weeks, and I read her 2 chapters a night. That's all she could manage. And because it was too overwhelming for her, and she corrected it, and we, like where I'd got things a bit wrong, or I'd merged a couple of different stories together, she was able to pull it out. And so I'd written most of the story, and then we went back and revised it. But I do want to say this, because I think this is really important for people to understand, because I hope people are listening to this thinking, oh my goodness me, what about Emily? What was this like for her? It has been an incredibly healing process for her. So about 4 nights in, we FaceTimed as usual, and I said, oh, you're looking really well, and you look different, and you look lighter. And she said, oh, it's funny you should say that, because she'd been at her she does a women's support group once a week, and she'd gone in, and they'd said, goodness me, you're looking good, you're looking lighter. And she said, yeah. And she said, I'm going through this process with my friend where we're writing my story. And so for her, it was actually very healing. And again, she felt very validated. And so again, I talked to her last night, actually, and, checked on her. She's doing really, really well. Medically, there's quite a lot of medical, and that's in the book as well. There's some medical stuff that's going on. So medically, there's a few hiccups, but psychologically and emotionally, she's actually doing.
That's great news. What advice would you give to other professionals thinking of turning their experience into a book?
Okay, so with Bugger Bug Ship, the solo book, that was all about me. So it was my stories, and I chose there are more stories that I got in the book from my life, but those I hold, those involve other people, and I really had to choose. There were some moments in Bugger Bug Shit where I am extremely raw, and I am sharing some things that have never been publicly shared before. And but I thought it was important to go in, because I thought it might be helpful for some people. This book was about Emily. And so whilst there are parts of me in the book and my reactions to things, I had to absolutely make sure that I honoured Emily and that I had permission for everything. There are some things that are not in the book that are personal to Emily. They're not necessarily about the abuse. You know, they're sort of personal to her. And she, or both of us actually, didn't feel that neither of us felt comfortable putting them in the book. And, you know, so I had to absolutely 100% respect Emily. And so if we're writing, I think we have to really work out what is our motivation for writing. What is my motivation for writing this book? Is this just because I want to write a book, or is this because I actually want to educate the community or to support the community or whatever it might be? But what is your motivation? And to ensure, if you're writing about somebody else, you've absolutely got their permission every single step of the way. And what I also knew with Emily was that she had said yes. However, what was really important for her, because her voice had been taken away by this man, was that if she said no, we stopped. So for me, this book was never more important than Emily. And every step of the way, I was asking her if it's okay. And I would check, is this okay to go in? So it was very much, whilst I did the writing, it was very much a joint project. And so, and I knew the most important thing is that she trusted me. And I had to hold that trust very, very preciously. And there are things that I want to do. I want to be able to speak to her children about it, but she has said no. And I understand it. I mean, I agree too. Right now, it's not the right time. But I can't do anything around this without her permission, because she absolutely has to trust me 100%. So I think that for other professionals who are wanting to write, it is very much about what is your motivation and making sure that there is a deeply trusting relationship with the person. The project, the book, is never, ever more important than the subject that you're writing about.
Good advice there. Definitely good advice. What does resilience mean to you in the context of this book?
Oh, look, I said this to Emily last night. I said, I think you're the bravest and most resilient woman I know. I've said that to her many times, and every time she said, I don't feel very resilient. But again, well, as I said in the book, and as I said earlier, the biggest surprise to me is that Emily is still alive. And either she could have been murdered or she could have taken her own life. And she hasn't. And she's written the foreword and the last paragraph, and I've got shivers now thinking about it. And she said, I used to be a smiley person, and now I can be a smiley person again. That just, for me, sums up everything about her. And I think that it's given her a new life. And she talks about that too. And so I think her resilience is incredible. She has been through the darkest times, and she has come out the other side. And yes, she is what's the word? That she's battle fatigued or whatever, battle scarred. But the girl that these two young women who became really close friends, the girl is still there. And her life has changed forever. But she's got a life and she's looking at what she can do. So what she wants to do is to give back to the community.
As do a lot of people that are
she
in
wants,
her position.
she wants to be an advocate. Yeah. She wants to be supportive. She's probably never going to work again, but she wants to, that essence of her, the caring, beautiful caring spirit that she has, and that smiley person is still there. And I just think that is the greatest thing. He took so much from her, but he didn't take that.
But he didn't.
No.
Yeah. That we might leave it at that now, Harry. Was there anything else that I've missed or you wanted to add?
I just, I really want people to challenge themselves to read this book. I had brunch with a friend this morning, and she's bought the book, and she said, I don't know whether I dare read it yet, because she's got a complex history as well. And I said, look, you've got to make that decision yourself, but it's an awful, awful subject. But I always say we need to look it in the eye. This is a problem.
Yeah.
And so I would really hope that people would find the strength to read it and then be motivated to do something about it. We have to do something.
Well, thank you for writing the book.
Pleasure.
I'm sure it's going to impact a lot of lives. It's available, people, in lots of different areas. You can purchase it on Amazon as a paperback, also on there on Kindle,
as an ebook.
on
we
Amazon.
Didn't tell them that it went to number 1.
Oh, it is number 1. Yes, it went number 1 in 3 different categories on Amazon. So it is an Amazon best-selling book as well. We are in the process of having it put on Audible, and that'll be in the next couple of months that it will be on Audible. If you'd like to join Morpheus Publishing's newsletter, then we can send that out, or you can contact Harry herself, and I'll have all the details in the show note for her contact details. She is available for speaking opportunities on this subject, as well as you're doing workshops.
Yep, doing workshops, doing practitioner training, speaking. Yeah. Actually, one personal thing, what I will say is that if there are victim survivors who are listening to this and they don't know where to go, they can contact me, and I can't really do anything for them, but what I can do is put them in contact. My contacts and my the professional part of me, I can refer people to places. If they're stuck, then, please don't hesitate to let me know, and we'll try and find.
And we did list various places as well as a reference in the back of the book, so you can get it straight on Kindle and look towards the back of the book, and there all the numbers and that are in there as well. So, well, thank you, Harry, for our chat today. Although it is a sobering one, it all needs to be said. So I look forward to working with you at Morpheus Publishing, bringing the next book to life and getting this one out to the wider community. So until next time, everyone, happy reading.
Thank you for tuning in to the Author Spotlight podcast by Morpheus Publishing. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and found inspiration for your own writing journey. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to our podcast for more exciting content and author insights. Stay connected with us on social media at Morpheus Publishing, and visit our website at www.morpheuspublishing.com.au to discover how we can help you bring your book dreams to life. Remember, don't wait. Take the first step now and turn your dreams into reality. See you next time.